I was in my late 40s when I realized something that honestly embarrassed me. And that's probably why I procrastinated on this topic so much. What I realized was that I didn't understand money. And as simple as that seems, it's a fact. I didn't understand investing. I didn't understand retirement planning. I didn't understand even some pretty basic financial things. And the worst part was I felt like I should already know this stuff. I mean, I was educated and it seemed like it's not a difficult thing for a lot of people. But the truth is, what you can see from the outside of other people's lives doesn't often reveal what's going on the inside. So if you've ever had a moment where you were thinking, I should know this by now, just know you're absolutely not alone in this. For some women, that realization happens in their 30s, their 40s, their 50s, or even later. But the feeling is fundamentally exactly the same, regardless of what age you are. To be fair, in my first marriage, in my household, I did handle a lot of things in terms of how things ran. I did the grocery shopping. I bought clothing. I handled school supplies. I paid for kids' school activities or extracurriculars, whatever needed to be dealt with in terms of day to day running of the house. I was everybody's calendar and the organizer of all the things. I coordinated things from sports events to teams and all of that sort of stuff. But what I didn't manage was my own checkbook. Well, I did briefly. Until I paid one bill late, we got a single late fee, and that was shortly after my first child was born. And that's when my responsibility with the checkbook ended. So apparently that was a one and done error as far as managing the checkbook was concerned. And as simplistic as it seems, losing that little piece of control or responsibility that I had chipped away at the confidence that I had in myself to handle other important financial matters. So not only did I not manage any of the day-to-day finances, I didn't manage anything related to retirement or investments. And all of that created the situation where money was something I just didn't feel comfortable talking about. Money became a subject that I avoided at almost all cost. Because whenever my ex-husband and I sat down to talk about finances, it never felt like a conversation. It felt more like a lecture. And it did become a lecture in cases where it seemed like, or he felt like, I had spent more than I should have or more than I had previously on things like groceries or clothing expenses. And that left me feeling like I needed to explain myself. I had to explain pricing increases. I had to explain that we were hosting an event or supplying food for something. I had to explain growth spurts in the kids and why they needed new shoes or coats for the winter, or whatever it may have been. It felt like I just needed to justify whatever I had done. But ultimately, he wasn't mad about it, but things just didn't go without explanation. So every time we had one of those conversations, I walked away feeling not very good about myself. And it was just something inside myself, my own internal feelings about this. So eventually, I just avoided those conversations with every fiber of my being. I would procrastinate, I would avoid, I would deflect. I would just try to get out of it pretty much in any way I possibly could. So if you've ever walked away from a money conversation and you felt smaller inside instead of more confident, you probably know exactly what I mean. And I would really love it if you would leave me a comment telling me how you can relate. Sometimes it's good for me not to feel alone in this, even though I've had literally hundreds of conversations with people. And I know intellectually that I'm not alone. It still helps and it reinforces that feeling when you get feedback from other people in seeing how your situation is something that they can relate to. Now, this next part is something that I think a lot of people, a lot of women specifically, actually need to hear, and that's that not understanding money is very rarely, if ever, about intelligence. It's almost always, like 99.99% of the time, it's almost always about your exposure to it and the conversations that you've had around it. Many women grow up in households where money simply wasn't discussed. Then they move into marriages or relationships where finances were handled by someone else. Sometimes they're even told not to worry about it, and it's kind of presented like it's a sweet thing. It's a kind gesture. Somebody else is taking care of you, and it's just not something that you need to bother yourself with. And if you're thinking that at all sounds familiar, you are definitely not the only one. A lot of us didn't grow up talking about money at the dinner table. So if money isn't talked about when we're young, it doesn't naturally become something that you feel comfortable discussing later in your life, especially with people who were raised with a different money environment, perhaps, than you were. Maybe the person that you're trying to have a conversation with had money and you didn't, or vice versa. Just all kinds of different life situations can make those conversations seem very uncomfortable and sometimes adversarial. Little girls aren't often included in financial conversations. I mean, frankly, many children in general aren't included in those family financial conversations. But it seems that girls and women in general internalize the lack of those conversations differently. But in households that are trying to prepare kids for adulthood, especially young girls, there are ways to talk about money responsibly, that you can have conversations around things like allowances. You can discuss first jobs and how to allocate earnings from that. You can discuss what gets saved and what gets spent and on what type of things. You can help set goals and discuss saving for something that your child or your teenager really wants. You can have conversations where everyone in the household contributes to deciding what activities fit into the family budget. Those conversations teach kids how money works without needing to expose every detail of family finances to them. When those conversations never happen, it's very easy to reach adulthood without ever having really learned how money works or how to talk about it. So I'm genuinely curious, what was your experience growing up? Were you part of a conversation, or were you told not to worry about it? Or was it just never discussed at all? If you want to go crazy, and let me know in the comments and tell me maybe why you think that would happen in your household the way that it did. I really wonder if it was really because you think your family didn't want to burden you, or if you didn't have those conversations, do you think they were embarrassed about their situation? Or that they didn't want to have the conversation out of that embarrassment? For me, I know growing up, money was not part of a discussion at all. It was something that I knew we probably didn't have enough of, or as much as my parents would have liked. And I think in particular that made my dad embarrassed. And by being embarrassed, he refused to address it at all. And that ultimately manifested itself in a lot of ways that we'll get to another time. But in terms of the topic for today, my personal turning point in my household during my first marriage was when I really knew deep down that my marriage was coming to an end. And I had probably known for a while that it wasn't an ideal situation, but with young kids and all that comes with that, it just wasn't something that I was willing to address because I didn't know how to handle the ramifications of the action. But when divorce becomes more than just a real possibility and it becomes more of an inevitability, that's when you suddenly realize just how many things you're about to have to learn how to handle on your own. And that realization can be overwhelming and honestly pretty terrifying. And as I alluded to, sometimes fear of the unknown is what keeps people frozen in places even when the situation isn't healthy anymore. For me, that meant I was going to have to learn a lot of financial things, and I was going to have to learn it quickly. Has anyone else ever been there? I'm guessing the answer is yes. So once I was divorced, and actually shortly before the divorce was final because of the separation, I suddenly needed to handle everything for myself. And that truly meant everything. I moved. So now I had a house to take care of by myself. I still had a couple of kids at home and one in college. And I was having to handle all of the financial picture and the stuff I didn't really understand. I didn't understand how to manage it at that point. So there was a very, very steep learning curve. I had spent many years at home raising kids. I homeschooled them. And now I was having to figure out how I was going to support myself long term. I had to set up all of my own accounts, which I know doesn't seem like a big deal, but this looked very different than when I had last done it in my early 20s. This was much more extensive, as someone in your late 40s. It was just a very different scenario to set everything up at that point. I needed to build my own credit. I had to rebuild a credit history that I was losing as joint accounts that we had had for almost 21 years were closed. I needed to understand retirement planning. I had to learn how to find a financial advisor that understood my unique, although not really that unique situation. I wanted someone that I could have a conversation with and a partnership with. I wanted guidance and not a dictatorship. And all of that felt like a lot because honestly, it was a lot. There's an old saying that asks the question, how do you eat an elephant? And the answer is, of course, one bite at a time, right? So that's exactly what learning about money became for me. It's an experience that taught me something that I think every woman should understand about finances. And that is that financial literacy isn't something that anyone is born with. It is something that you have to build step by step or bite by bite. So in trying to wrangle personal finances into control, the mistake a lot of people make when they start trying to fix their finances is that they end up starting in the wrong place. You have to understand that the first step isn't budgeting and it isn't investing. It's simply understanding. The first step is simply understanding your own financial picture. You need to know what you own. You need to know how simplistic that sounds, but it's a big deal to know what your property is and what you're responsible for. Next, you have to know what you owe, and that's like big picture grand total sorts of things. And then the next step, you need to know how much money is coming in and how often does that money come in? Is it coming from income? Is it coming from child support? Is it coming from spousal support? And how long will those things last? Do you have other sources of income that you do contract work for or a side hustle? If your income can be more sporadic, you're just going to need to plan differently. But ultimately, you need to understand how money is flowing into the ecosystem of your life. And then you need to know how much money is going out. You need to know what bills get paid. You need to know how much you need to pay and exactly when those payments are due. What's due monthly? What's due quarterly, semi-annually, or annually? Are there tax obligations or something like that? Do you have child support or spousal support payments of your own that you're going to have to make? Those things will need to be taken into consideration, and you need to just plan for how long those will be part of your plan. You need to think about property taxes, car insurance, health insurance, business insurance if you have a business, any number of things that just may be part of your life that you haven't had to deal with before. You just have to think about them now. And those things they're going to be on different time schedules. So before you make a plan, you need to know what your starting point actually looks like. And the good news is that once you understand the big picture, everything else becomes so much easier to learn. And this is something that I wish someone had told me literally years earlier. If you're realizing later in life that you need to understand money better, it doesn't mean you're behind, because it's never too late. It always felt like I was somehow lagging behind everyone else, which in reality, I can know in my head that it's not true. But it still doesn't change how you feel in the moment. But understanding that it's just something that means that this is now your moment to take control really helps you shift how you take action. So if this happens in your 20s, your 30s, 40s, 50s, or sometimes later, your time is your time. And what you do with it from this point going forward, that's the only thing that really matters. You can't control anything in your past. You can't control what's in the rearview mirror. You can just look through the windshield ahead of you. You see the road that's in front of you, and that's all you need to address. So the only thing that you can do with what's in your rearview mirror is to learn from those choices that were made, and what may have been viewed as a mistake was really just an opportunity to learn a lesson. So you can take those lessons and apply them to the road that's in front of you, but you can't change the road that's behind you. So I hope you'll take a moment to tap that subscribe button, and while you're at it, the like button, because that is how I know that this content is something that you can relate to. And then please, I would love it if you would leave me a comment to let me know how you're feeling and what you've learned from your own financial journey. And if you want to let me know what you'd like to learn, that'll help me plan for the future. Thanks for sticking with me till the end, and I so look forward to helping you eat that elephant bite by bite. You've got this.